and two young men were finding out about friendship. We grew up in the mean streets of mid-Sussex, on different sides of the tracks. He was from the bad end of Cowfold. Well, I grew up in the projects on the Upper East Side of Haywards Heath. We first came across each other, and barely into our teens, we became members of rival gangs. His group was the Firm, and mine were the Casuals. Like the Bloods and the Crips, you could tell us apart by our clothes. While the Firm stretched the school uniform code to the limit by wearing cardigans instead of V-neck sweaters. We Casuals express ourselves by donning navy blue chinos instead of the regulation Farrah slacks. The inevitable flashpoint came one afternoon in geography. Notes were passed back and forth, and a fight was arranged. Friday night, Clare Hall Park, 7 p.m, before the monthly Soundwave disco for under 16s. Myself, Andrew Mackey, Christian Bates and Richard Burgess were paired off against rival members of the Firm, and I was drawn against Youngie. Now even then I was fairly big for my age, so clearly I fancied my chances. But when the night of the big fight came, Youngie managed to be inexplicably delayed arriving at the venue. I never found out why, but I suspect his mum may have something to do with it. But Youngie was good enough to arrange for a replacement to fight in his place. A towering Neanderthal with a pituitary gland problem called Martin Dowd.
Absolutely true, yeah.
He was a good foot higher than everyone else in our year. And even at the age of 13, I knew from encountering him in the showers, he had more hair on his nether regions than I had on my entire head. The fight was a foregone conclusion, and I adopted the ultimately successful strategy of wearing him out by letting him punch me as hard as he liked. After this inauspicious start, we became friends. In fact, best friends, as we arranged this day. Bonded by the fact that we are astrological star twins, born on the same day. And also by the fact that living out in the sticks in Cowfold, and later Pease Pottage, Youngie would often need to stay at friends' houses after an evening out. And my house, Hotel Ponte Scordo, as he called it, was one of the few homes he wasn't banned from. Now, while many of us would see staying as a guest in someone else's home as a time to be on our best behaviour, James would use these occasions to party like it was 1999, work his way through the host's booze cabinet, before inevitably getting involved in some hijinks and shenanigans. Not much has changed there. So this brings me another one of James's qualities, the ability to get into some preposterous situations, but always come up smelling of roses. To mention this, I'm going to tell 3 stories, and I've got a present here to illustrate one of them.
What's he getting at? Ah!
The dumper truck incident. After a night carousing at Warwick's parents' house, Youngie and Glenn Jackson found themselves in the early hours of the morning in need of more entertainment. Anyone who knows Burgess Hill will know that their options are fairly limited. So of course they went over to the building site across the road, borrowed a dumper truck, drove it several miles to a nearby lake where they stopped for a bit of boating. Now, being an honest man, James then decided to drive the dumper truck back, and so found himself driving down an A road at 7 a.m, Saturday morning, calmly waving the passing traffic on. On you go, on you go, on you go. This was working fine, until one driver drew alongside Youngie. He waved him on. He didn't go fast. On you go, gestured James. No, said the bloke, shaking head. It's my effing dumper truck. was on his way to start his shift. Now most people at this point would say fair cop and give themselves up. James and Glenn decided to try and outrun them. The Ford Escort versus a dumper truck. After a short chase, they gave themselves up. Luckily for Jim, the guy saw the funny side. The Land Rover incident. It was after a party at my parents' house in Hayward. Many bad things happened that night. Not all of them Youngie's fault. But probably the worst incident came when him and Glenn Jackson again decided to take a breakaway group of partygoers for a drive in Glenn's Land Rover. Glenn had often boasted that his Landy had a pulling power of 50 tonnes. Well, he proved it that night when he backed it into another friend's parents' garage and knocked the whole building off its foundations. Some people, after being involved in an incident like that, might keep a low profile. Not James. He turned up the following week with his dad to provide a quote for the repairs. Not mentioning the fact that he'd been in the back of the Land Rover when the damage was done. Final story is the night Youngie ruined Christmas. The night Youngie ruined Christmas. One Christmas Eve, after a few beers at the Linden Tree pub in Linfield, Jim ended up staying at Warwick's house again in Burgess Hill. Christmas being the following day, Warwick was keen to get to bed and have some sleep. But James, as usual, was keen to keep the party going. He found out that one of the presents under the bed was a bottle of Jack Daniels, and badgered Warwick, as only Youngie can, until he agreed to open it. Warwick, Youngie and Warwick's brother Dom then ended up staying up until the early hours of the morning, seeing off the bottle of whiskey. No one knows what happened next. But in the morning, Warwick's parents came down Christmas Day to find the tree knocked over, many of the presents smashed, and vomit on most of the presents in the little. Now Youngie, as he does, slept the sleep of the righteous that night. Had a lie in, and then popped in to wish everyone a happy Christmas before going back to people. Another quality of Youngie is, it's fair to say, he's a very thick-skinned character. After school, he ended up joining his dad's firm as an apprentice carpenter. As the boss's son, he naturally had a harder time than most young apprentices, and was the victim of some particularly personal and hurtful graffito attacks, some of which actually questioned his sexuality. This all reached biblical proportions one day, when James was actually tied to a stake and crucified outside a building site he was working on. All good character building stuff. Passers-by apparently asked him what he was protesting about. Another of James's qualities is persistence. Something he has shown in his courtship of Hannah, the way he has stuck to his guns to pursue a successful career as a photographer, and is reluctant to never ever give up a drink. It was this insistence on always finishing his beer that led me and James to have what was the first in what I can only describe as a series of near-death experiences.
I'll bring it for this.
We were out in Brighton, having a night out, in a nightclub, when we tried to leave the club, and two bouncers, not unreasonably, said we couldn't leave while carrying 2 full pints of beer. We decided, instead of drinking our beers and saying cheerio, we would sneak out of the building via a fire exit, which led us out into an enclosed courtyard, enter another building, climb 6 flights of stairs, and then attempt to climb down an escape ladder, still carrying our pints. This all ended up in tears with Youngie in hospital, fracturing a vertebrae. The story has a silver lining. Like a World War I soldier who shot himself in the foot to escape the horror of the trenches, Youngie's back injury meant he had an excuse to escape the building site. And he decided to embark on a less physically demanding career as a ski instructor. Many of us decide to take a few months out between the rat race of education and career to go travelling, or maybe do a ski season. Youngie took this idea and ran with it. For about